This is how the gas dryer should be heating up. You will need to look through this peephole to see how the heating cycle works. Remove this plastic cover if your dryer has one. Follow me, let's take a look inside of the dryer. When you turn on the dryer, this is what should happen. The igniter should start glowing. The igniter should glow to a bright orange color. The heat from the igniter should open the contacts inside of the flame sensor. The igniter should be turned off, the gas valve should open, and the gas should flow and get ignited. The dryer will continue heating until the operating thermostat senses that the temperature inside of the dryer is about 155 degrees. Then it will open and shut off the heat. When the temperature inside of the drum drops to below 140 degrees, the operating thermostat will close and the cycle will start all over again. This cycle will be repeated as many times as needed during the drying cycle. That is the way that the heating cycle should operate on your gas dryer. Let me show you what to check behind the gas dryer when the igniter won't glow. Disconnect the dryer from the wall outlet. The main problem when replacing parts from behind a gas dryer is that the dryer is attached to the gas line, and you don't supposed to disconnect any gas line from the dryer. So the space you have to work on the dryer is about 10 inches between the wall and the dryer. Disconnect the exhaust hose. Remove the back panel holding screws. Remove the back panel. Let me show you how to check the high limit thermostat. Remove one of the wires from the thermostat. Set your multimeter to read ohms. Take a reading between the two terminals on the high limit thermostat like this. The reading should be 0 ohms. If the reading is infinity, the high limit thermostat is bad and you will need to replace it. Let me show you how to check the thermal fuse on a gas dryer. On a gas dryer, when the thermal fuse blows, the motor will run, but the gas dryer will not heat. Set your multimeter to read ohms. Disconnect one of the wires from the thermal fuse and take a reading with your ohms meter between the two terminals on the thermal fuse. The reading should be 0 ohms. If the reading is infinity, the thermal fuse is bad. If the thermal fuse is bad, you will need to replace the thermal fuse and the operating thermostat at the same time. To check the operating thermostat, you will need to remove one of the red wires. Set your multimeter to read ohms. Take a reading from the terminal you removed the red wire from and the other terminal with the red wire on. The reading should be 0 ohms. If the reading is infinity, the operating thermostat is bad and you will need to replace it. To replace the operating thermostat, remove it with all the wires attached to it. Install the new thermostat and transfer the wires one by one to the new thermostat. Those were the parts that you check behind a gas dryer when the igniter is not glowing. Let me show you how to check and replace the igniter. Disconnect the dryer from the wall outlet. You should already know how to take the dryer apart. If you don't know how, view the video on how to take the dryer apart first. This is the location of the igniter. Let's start by disconnecting the igniter from the wire harness. Set the multimeter to read ohms. Take a reading between the two terminals on the igniter's connecting plug. The reading should be between 40 and 150 ohms. If you're using an analog meter, the needle is going to move close to the 0. If the reading is infinity, the igniter is bad and you will need to replace it. To replace the igniter, you will need a 5/16 wrench. Loosen up the screw that holds the igniter in place just enough to take the igniter out. Grab the bad igniter by the wires and take it right out. Use the bad igniter to practice installing the igniter a couple times before you attempt to install the new one. These igniters are fragile and break very easily. If the old igniter holder is good, go ahead and use it. This way you don't have to install a new one. If you need to replace the igniter holder, this is the way you do it. Remove the old one. Grab the new igniter holder and screw in the igniter holding screw. Just screw it in enough to hold it in place. Set the igniter holder in place and screw the holding screw. Grab the new igniter by the wires and start easing it in. Nice and easy, just take your time. Set it in place. Hold it with your right hand finger, and with your left hand tighten the holding screw. Just tighten enough to hold the igniter in place. Don't over tighten or you could break it. Check the igniter with your ohms meter to make sure that it didn't broke during the installation. If everything checks okay, just plug in the igniter to the wire harness. That is the way to check and replace the igniter. Let me show you how to check and replace the flame sensor. Disconnect the dryer from the wall outlet. You should already know how to take the dryer apart. If you don't know how, view the video on how to take the dryer apart first. This is the location of the flame sensor. Set the multimeter to read ohms. Disconnect one of the wires from the flame sensor. Take a reading between the two terminals on the flame sensor. The reading should be 0 ohms. If the reading is infinity, the flame sensor is bad and must be replaced. To replace a bad flame sensor, remove the two wires and loosen up the holding screw. Put a little bit of downward pressure on the bracket until it clears the holding screw, then take out the bad flame sensor. Set the new flame sensor in place. Apply a little bit of downward pressure and put the tab under the screw like this. Use a pair of needle nose pliers to bend the tab upward a little bit. Then tighten the holding screw to hold the flame sensor in place. Connect the two wires to the two terminals on the new flame sensor. It doesn't matter which way the wires are connected. That was a way to check and replace the flame sensor. Let me show you how to check and replace the gas valve coils. Disconnect the dryer from the wall outlet. You should already know how to take the dryer apart. If you don't know how, view the video on how to take the dryer apart first. If the igniter glows but the gas valve fails to open, the first thing you do is replace the coils. Replacing the coils will solve the problem when the gas valve won't open about 95% of the times. To replace the coils, Remove the wire harnesses from the coils. Remove the 2 screws from the coils holding bracket and remove the bracket. Remove one of the bad coils and install a new one. Then remove the other bad coil and install the other new one. Make sure you can see these nipples on top of the coils. Go ahead and install the coils holding bracket. Make sure that the nipples go through the holes on the bracket. Like this. Screw in the 2 holding screws. And connect the wiring harnesses to the coils. Make sure that the connections are nice and tight. Replacing the coils will solve the problem of the gas valve not opening most of the times. If it doesn't, then you might gonna need a new gas valve. If you need to replace a gas valve, you will need to call a licensed plumber or a licensed repairman to replace the gas valve for you. In most states, you will need to be a licensed plumber or pipe fitter to connect or disconnect any gas appliances. That is the reason why we don't show you how to replace a gas valve, because you need to be licensed. Let me show you how to check the gas valve coils with an ohms meter. Disconnect the wire harnesses from the coils. To take a reading on the coils, it's best to use a digital meter. An analog meter will not be as accurate. Set the multimeter to read ohms. Let me show you how to use the digital meter. This symbol means that the meter is reading in kilo ohms. The numbers to the left of the dot are thousands, and the numbers to the right of the dot are hundreds. We will start with the coil with 3 terminals. Take a reading between the terminal on the left and the terminal on the center. The reading should be about 1.400 kilo ohms. Take a reading between the terminal on the center and the terminal on the right. The reading should be about 1.900 kilo ohms. Take a reading between the terminal on the left and the terminal on the right. The reading should be about 0.550 kilo ohms. Take a reading between the 2 terminals on the coil with only 2 terminals. The reading should be about 1.200 kilo ohms. If the reading is OL, meaning open line, on any of the coils, the coil is bad and you should replace the 2 coils as a set. That was the way to check the coils with a digital ohms meter.